Good morning, class. Let's continue with our subject, the poetical books, and we have come to the last part of the book, that is the book of Song of Solomon. Okay, the book of Song of Solomon is the last books of these five poetical books. So let's read. Let's go through the notes. Okay. First of all, we'll see the author. Okay, let's go to your notes. Though some critics reject King Solomon as the author and take chapter 1 verse 1 to mean which is about Solomon, the internal evidence supports the traditional belief that Solomon is its author. The contents of the book agree with all that we know about the abilities and wisdom of Solomon, and there is no compelling reason not to regard him as the author. Solomon is mentioned 7 times in chapter 1 verse 1, then verse 5, chapter 3 verses 7 and 8, verses 7, 9 and 11, then chapter 8 verses 11 and 12. And he is identified as the groom. Verse 1 asserts that Solomon wrote this song as one of many, in fact the best of the many songs which he wrote. 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 32 tells us he composed 1005 such songs. Note that the text does not simply say the Song of Solomon, but the Song of Songs, which are Solomon's. Okay, so regarding the author, there are some critics who says that this is not written by Solomon because chapter 1 verse 1 says that which is about Solomon. Now when you read Song of Solomon chapter 1 and verse 1, it says the Song of Songs which is Solomon's. Okay, the Song of Songs which is Solomon. So these critics to interpret the Song of Songs which is about Solomon. Okay, all the songs that has been written here in the Song of Solomon is not written by Solomon, but it has been collected, the Song of Solomon, by some other people. Okay, that is what the critic says. But the internal evidence support the traditional belief in the Jewish people, the Jewish tradition, the belief that it was written by Solomon. Now we have the internal evidence to support this traditional belief, to say that it was by Solomon. Okay, the content of the books agree with all that we know about the abilities and wisdom of Solomon. Now we see the abilities of Solomon, the wisdom of Solomon, and when you read these books, we understand that, and we see the abilities of King Solomon. And there is no compelling reason not to regard him as the author. To say that Solomon was the author, we have enough evidences from internal evidences and even from external evidences that is believed by the traditional Jews. But to say that it was not by Solomon, there was no enough reason to say that this is not by Solomon. Okay. And we see from the internal evidences that Solomon is mentioned 7 times in the text. Chapter 1 verse 1, then verse 5, chapter 3 verse 7, verse 9 and verse 11, chapter 8 verses 11 and 12. So by this we come to conclusion that it was written by Solomon. And the text also identified Solomon as groom. Okay, verse 1 asserted Solomon wrote these songs as one of the many. So in fact the best of the many. When you read 1 King chapter 4 and verse 32, it says Solomon composed 1005 songs, and out of that this is the best song, because the text says the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs, which is Solomon. So the Song of Songs, which are Solomon. That means the Song of Songs, out of many songs, these songs that is recorded in the Song of Solomon is the best songs among all these 1005 songs. Okay, so the author, there is no doubt it was by Solomon. Okay, then let's come to the date of writing. The song was probably written early in Solomon's career, about 965 BC. At this point, Solomon has 60 queens and 80 concubines. Okay, chapter 6 and verse 8. But later in his life, he would have 700 queens and 3,300 concubines. Okay, 300 concubines. 1 King chapter 11 and verse 3. We know that Solomon has 700 wives and 300 concubines, recorded in 1 King chapter 11 and verse 3. But here when you come to the Song of Solomon in chapter 6 and verse 8, chapter 6 and verse 8, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgin without number. So Solomon at this time, he has already 60 queens and 80 concubines. Okay, 60 queens and 80 concubines. That means it seems like this was the early in his career. Okay, the early in his range. Now, Solomon has 60 wives, and then how can he wrote such a love story? Now there is a traditional belief that Solomon, out of all these 700 wives, he loves this Solomite the most. Okay, this Solomite the most. So when he fell in love with these Solomites, okay, he has written all these beautiful songs. Okay, that is what the traditional beliefs says. Whatever it may be, the date of writing is 965 BC, around 965 BC, at his early career. Okay, by this time we have seen that he has 60 queens and 80 concubines. Okay, that is all about the date of his writing. Then let's come to theme and purpose. The Song of Solomon is a love song filled with metaphor and imagery designed to portray God's view of love and marriage, the beauty of physical love between man and woman. The book, which is presented as a drama with several scenes, has three major players: the bride Sodomite, the king Solomon, and the chorus daughter of Jerusalem. The purpose of the book will depend on the viewpoint taken as to the way the book should be interpreted. The following will illustrate this in the discussion of the three views presented here. Okay, the Song of Solomon is a love song with metaphor and imagery. Now, the Song of Solomon is a love song filled with metaphor. You know what is metaphor? Okay, it is a degree of comparison or the figurative language of comparison between the things that you are about to talk. Metaphor is a figurative language of comparison. Okay, you compare something so that you will understand the meaning better. And imagery. All this we have discussed in the hermeneutic class, and I believe that you will know what is metaphor and what is imagery. Okay, so the Song of Solomon is written or filled with metaphors and imagery designed to portray God's view of love and marriage. So how God loved us has been portrayed here. Okay, it's a metaphoric language here, and how Christ is going to come and marry. We are the bride of Christ. Okay, we are the bride of Christ, and that we see from the book of from the Song of Solomon. The beauty of physical love and between man and woman. Okay, leaving aside the spiritual realms, we have the lesson. We have a very beautiful lesson to be learned for the physical love between man and woman. And this book is presented as the drama with several scenes. Okay, we have three major players here: Solomon as the bride, and Solomon as the bridegroom, and Solomite as the bride, and Chorus, the daughter of Jerusalem. So these are the three main major players here in this drama. Now, the purpose of this book will depend upon the viewpoint taken as to the way the book should be interpreted. There are three interpretations here in this book, and according to the interpretation, the theme and the purpose will be taken. So next class we will see what are those three interpretations of this book. Okay, and depending on that interpretation, the theme and the purpose also goes. And we will conclude which interpretation is the literal interpretation or the right interpretation. Okay, so all these three interpretations, we may not take all these three interpretations, but out of these three interpretations, we have to take the right interpretation, and we will see what is the right interpretation out of these three interpretations. Okay, so we'll wind up our class, and we'll see next class. Okay, of those three interpretations. Okay, till then, have a nice day.